Welcome back to Around the Table with the AOTR. I'm Cy Marie here with my co host, Beverly L. Anderson. Tonight, we are honored to welcome an incredible guide and author, Gissele Taraba. Gissele is author of Reimagining Work as well as being head of the Maitri Center, and she is a leading voice in conscious relationships and relational well being. And her books offer powerful insights into the journey of self discovery. Gissele, it's such a joy to have you here tonight, and welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me on this show. It really is a pleasure.
Yeah, we're so glad to have you here, Giselle. Your work at the Maitri Center has touched so many lives, and I can't wait to dig into your wisdom tonight.
Absolutely. So your teachings on Maitri and conscious living are so timely and necessary. And your work at the Maitri Center focuses on self discovery and relational well being. Can you tell us how your personal journey led you to that work?
Yeah, absolutely. First, I should say that this is not the work I thought I'd be doing since I was very young because I had a lot of adversity in my childhood. I wanted to work in the child protection, child welfare system. And so as I got older, I went to the route of quality assurance and ended up working within the field of child welfare. And I thought I would live and die in child welfare. It was my passion. It was something I wanted to do since I was very young. But I got to the point where I could see that the workers were really burnt out. The families felt separated, isolated. They didn't feel loved, especially the kids. And I was starting to burn out myself. And I actually had attained the level of high leadership. So I was a director at a Children's Aid Society. And I was looking for something that could help the workers and even like the young people as well feel less disconnected, less lonely, more loved, more accepted, more unity. And so, in my trying to find something like that, I stumbled on compassion and stumbled at the same time on mindfulness as well. And so I thought, this is it. I feel it in my heart that this is the thing. This is what I'm going to bring back. And so I started to practice it myself to see what the effects would be. And as I practiced more mindfulness and more compassion towards myself, I noticed my relationships transform. The more I was loving towards myself, the more love I had to give other people, the more I forgave myself, the more I could forgive other people. And I was so excited to bring this to the child welfare system. To be honest, it's not a system that is really open to that kind of work because it's so fear-based and it's so risk-based. And so I found myself swimming upstream. And I remember lying in bed one time and I was like, organization was in the middle of a takeover at the time. So, and I was really being pushed to kind of have a leadership role in this, like amalgamation that was happening. And I remember I was lying in bed and I felt in my heart a calling from like my higher self, universe, source, basically to continue to do this compassion work. And I remember lying down in bed and saying, I can't do both. So if you need me to do this work, you need to give me a runway because I can't do work's ramping up. So I can't do both. And a few days later, I was talking to my boss and she offered me this incredible package, which I was very blessed to have. And so I ended up leaving the organization to start this work. But even then, I didn't quite exactly know what I was supposed to be doing. I thought I was just supposed to be like a mindfulness and compassion teacher. But I met somebody really extraordinary. Her name is Lara Naughton, and she's author of the book, The Jaguar Man. And she was talking about extraordinary acts of compassion. And in fact, it saved her life. And I thought, I got to share these stories. And so I started a podcast called Love and Compassion with Gisele. And I've been able to share some extraordinary stories about how love and compassion can help us transform ourselves and our world. And that sort of led to me writing the book, and that led to my TEDx talk, and that led to a whole series of extraordinary things that I get to do in my everyday life. But it was not what I was planning. I thought I would live and die in child welfare.
That is amazing. So, with that in mind, you're the author of several books, including Reimagining Work. What does Maitri mean to you, and how do you write about this concept?
So I was looking for to name my center something that would capture the essence of what I wanted to talk about. In Maitri in Sanskrit means loving kindness. And so didn't just want to talk about just love in the traditional sense, because many people, when they think about love, they think about romantic love, but that's not really love. A lot of romantic love is like expectations. I wanted to talk about unconditional love, love without boundaries, being able to see each other as human beings, being able to love one another as brothers and sisters. And so to me, the concept of Maitri really captures the concept. And that's how I kind of came to write about it. And really focusing on how do we see the humanity in each other? How do we then take all of the issues that we have, especially in the workplace, and inject some compassion in there and inject more love and inject more curiosity or, relationship building and unity rather than what we sometimes or often do in the workplace, which is punish, isolate, separate.
Wow, that's really an awesome description. I appreciate you giving us that. So, your book explores themes of conscious relationships and the integration of mind and body. What inspired you to delve into those specific areas? And I know you've touched on that a little bit.
Yeah, I didn't realize how much I lived in my head and not enough in my heart and not enough in my body. I had some experiences when I was younger that made me realize that I was not really fully in my body, that I almost had kind of abandoned myself and abandoned my body. I felt disconnected as if it could do something to me. And really this journey that I went on was about reconnecting myself with all aspects of myself, not to get rid of the mind, but not let it be the boss. Like the way that, because I went through a journey of like deep anxiety. And what I noticed as I really explored my anxiety was that, the mind, from my perspective, is like a risk advisor, right? Like, let's say I'm the boss, like my true self is the boss. And then you've got a mind that gives you all these thoughts and tells you, well, this could go negative or that could go negative. Like any risk advisor in an organization, you'd be like, okay, thank you for that thought. But what happens in anxiety is that the risk advisor becomes the CEO and it sees everything as a risk. And so I live from that place constantly in my head, constantly thinking about worst case scenario, constantly trying to figure stuff out and control things out. And I wasn't enough in my heart. But when I started to shift from a mindset to a more heart-based work, more heart-based way of living, I started to feel a sense of connection with myself, a sense of wholeness and completeness. Now, this journey isn't done. It's an ongoing process. And there are days where you struggle and then you reconnect back to yourself, you reconnect back to that soothing. And because I had such an adverse childhood, I almost had to reparent myself. I had to tell myself a whole bunch of positive things. I had to re-nurture myself. I had to learn how to show myself how to look at things more positively. Now, in the beginning, it was really, really difficult. And in fact, what I used to do is I used to listen to Louise Hay. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of Louise Hay. I love her. I used to listen to her on repeat because she would always tell me like everything was fine. People are trustworthy. And so that's how I started to shift. And so, but really it was about reconnecting my mind and body together and then translating that into my workspace, because work isn't separate from our individual lives, even though we've been taught that they're like, leave your emotions at home. That's for the home. Don't feel your feelings. That is bull crap because you can't compartmentalize. And in fact, what I saw, I became a director at some point at a children's aid society, and I managed like 6 or 7 departments. And one of them was HR. And what I noticed was that when leadership, the more that they disconnected from their feelings, especially their difficult feelings, the more likely they were to dehumanize someone else because they couldn't hold their feelings. And so to me, the key to having a compassionate workplace is to be able to connect and manage those difficult feelings so that then we can hold space for others.
Fantastic way to look at things. Very well thought out. You've spoken about the importance of deep listening and mindful communication. In your experience, how did these practices transform our relationships with others and ourselves?
It's a great question. First and foremost, we have to say that the majority of us do not listen to understand. We listen to respond or react. And I myself had gone through that experience. I used to be terrible at listening. I was so bad. I was always waiting for my turn just to do the rebuttal. I was debating, not truly listening. But I love what Valerie Carr, the lead of Revolutionary Love, says about true listening. She says that true listening means that you're willing to change your mind and heart. And so with that as an anchor, I realized that when I listened deeply to others and was willing to bear witness to their humanity, bear witness to their presence, they transformed and I transformed too. There's been instances where people have told me stuff like their skeletons in their closet, not because I was asking, but because I was so willing to be present with them. And it's so interesting because my sister shared a similar experience. She's a nurse. And she said, when she sat with people just in their full presence, people tell her like they're willing to disclose things in their life. And it's not, sometimes she's not prepared for that. But that's the beauty of truly being witness to one another and truly listening. But we have to be willing to then change our mind. And sometimes that's really difficult. We want to hold on so tightly to our beliefs because we're worried that if somehow we listen to somebody else, then we'll change that they'll impact us. That sometimes we're not really willing to be fully present.
I absolutely agree with that, and I think that that's something that people really need to let settle in right now because we are having a lot of problems where people are not applying themselves to engage to learn, but to try to argue and debate, and we could all learn a lot from you there. So, how do you balance the creative demands of writing with the hands-on work of guiding individuals and couples at the Maitri Center?
I do have to, I organize my time very well. And I also sometimes have to take a step back as well from dealing with one on one clients. I also am a professor at a university and I love that. I think I'm shifting my business a little bit to focus more on positive media because there's so much media that shows all this disunity, showing all of this conflict when one of the things I've heard in all of my work and from people that I've worked with is how much unity there is and the power of us coming together, the power of love, the power of compassion. All of those are so transformative. But, we share stories about people doing kindnesses and so on, but we're not talking enough about how to have those difficult conversations. How do we come together? We don't have to change our minds. We just have to be willing to to engage in dialogue and see each other's humanity. That's all that's required. But people think that if I have to listen to you, then I have to change my mind. And that's what we were saying, talking about like that whole debate thing. And so I try to manage my time as best as possible. I also have to manage the fact that I'm a mom of two beautiful children. So making sure that I don't become, so overworked. The other part too is I do during my week take time and set specific days just for writing. I really commit in the beginning just to dumping ideas on a page. People always say, "Oh, where do we start writing?" And they want it to be perfect. No, I don't know about you guys, but my first drafts are always garbage. Right? My first drafts are just not great in the beginning because you're just dumping information and then it takes shape and then you have editors and all these people that help you. And so, yeah, but I make sure that I allot special time for my writing.
For many, the path to self discovery can be challenging. What are some of the biggest obstacles people face in this process? And how do you think they can be overcome?
Wow, great questions. So I would say the biggest obstacles are, it all comes down to fundamentally to fear, but I'll name some other ones, is facing your fears. Facing our fears is probably the most difficult one. And fears can show up in many different ways. For example, sometimes some people on their journey to self-discovery find out that they're not really telling themselves the truth. Sometimes telling ourselves our own truth can be really difficult. For example, if we're in situations where we abandon ourselves or we stop being who we really are, often it'll be hard for us to tell ourselves our own truth because at the base of that, it might lead us to have shame or guilt. And those are difficult emotions we don't want to feel. And so we will project out, we will make it about other people, we'll focus on them because then we don't have to do the work of looking at ourselves. And I'm only saying this because I've myself have done it. I have been in situations where I have not told my truth, where I have abandoned myself, where I was projecting out to other people. My journey in self-discovery to really understand who am I really and who do I really want to be was really a journey of unlearning everything that I had learned about the world, about myself, and about what I was capable of. And really looking into and understanding my own inherent sense of worthiness. All of us are worthy just because we exist. And that's one thing that I've really had to grapple with. Even if I accomplish nothing, am I still worthy of my own love? Even if I don't meet all of these things and don't reach a level of wealth or a level of am I still worthy of my own love? And the answer is yes. Each and every single one of us is worthy of love just because we exist. We don't have to earn our own love, but we've been taught that we have to. And so that can really, really be difficult. So the unlearning, to unlearn that self-love wasn't narcissistic or selfish, I had to unlearn that everyone deserves compassion, even those who are most hurtful. So in the unlearning, I had to face a lot of my own fear and limiting beliefs. And let me tell you, that is difficult. And so anything that you can do on your journey on self-discovery to help you regulate, to help you feel safe in your body, you can do dancing, you can do move your body somatically, you can have massages, you can do exercise. I love to meditate. I meditate daily. I do Kriya yoga practice. So anything that you can do to help you feel safe in your body helps you then on your journey towards self-discovery.
Absolutely. It's powerful to hear your personal insights and professional guidance flow together. It really underlines why a conscious approach is so vital.
Exactly. So the next question is, you've worked with many communities and individuals. How has that advocacy shaped your perspective as both an author and a spiritual guide?
Well, it's interesting. I'm constantly learning from other people. I kind of laugh a little bit. We kind of have a society that we have created sort of expertism, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with inherently anything. We've taught ourselves that there has to be experts and then there's got to be students. But the truth of the matter is, I'm constantly learning, constantly expanding and growing and changing how I do things. I've learned a lot from marginalized communities in terms of how to do work on reconciliation, on compassion, and some of the challenges that we have in that dialogue. When I've put people together in dialogue in terms of, like addressing bullying and harassment or race and equity things, I could see how the person that was accused experienced shame and guilt and didn't know how to manage those feelings. And so I could see how it came out as a defensiveness or a projection or like a total just ejection. And so it is through my work with people and through my experiences and learning from others that I continuously shape and change and evolve the way that I work and the way that I actually practice myself.
That's
Wow, that is,
fantastic.
yeah, very deep. Who are some of the authors, teachers, or spiritual leaders who have inspired your own journey?
Wow, there's many. I'll start with my absolute favorites, which are Martin Luther King Jr., Jesus, Mandela, Gandhi, more, alive. We're talking about people like Valerie Carr, who talks about revolutionary love, Bell Hooks, who's obviously passed. I like Michael Beckwith as well. I like his spiritual teachings. And so those are some of the people that really kind of hit my heart that I go to when I kind of need a refresh. And I also practice a Kriya Yoga student. And I find Kriya Yoga in particularly is my grounding post. It really is about reconnecting with the body and reconnecting with God's source universe and really having that as your grounding foundation because things in life happen to all of us, and life can be a series of joys and fear and sadness and all of these other experiences. But the one thing I've learned in my experience is that the more that I can find the calm within myself, the more that I can allow these things to pass in a much smoother way than if I use the outside as an anchor. And so for me, my Kriya Yoga practice really is my foundation and my root. But for some people, it may be something else. You have to find something that works. For my daughter, meditation really doesn't work to the same extent as her doing her art. It enables her to sort of transport herself into a different world, sort of thing.
That's really significant, I feel like. So I guess was wondering, as a guide to the conscious living, what advice would you give to someone just beginning their journey of self discovery?
I would say, first and foremost, be kind to yourself. Be kind with your thoughts. Like there's no direct path. I know there's many people that say, like this is the path or this is the path. I truly believe that each one of us has like this little seed inside ourselves that has everything that we need to know about ourselves and has our own path, the same way that a little seed ends up being a tree. The seed is, if it's an orange tree, it's not going to end up being a banana tree or a different type of tree. It's always going to be an orange tree and it has everything it needs within that little seed. Of course, it needs water and it needs sunshine, but everything that it needs to grow, it's inherently within. And it's the same with us. So on our journeys, if we compare ourselves to other people, that makes our journeys more difficult. But if we're willing to love ourselves and be kind to ourselves, even when we make mistakes, and that happens in any journey, anyone who's ever written a book, and you guys have, knows about the hero's journey. There's always something that happens. And, sometimes the heroes make mistakes, but it's the willingness to get up, the willingness to say, sometimes in my own journey, I have to be honest, sometimes there's been circumstances where I was like, the only thing I had in those moments was my willingness to move forward. I didn't know how I was going to move forward. I didn't know when things were going to move forward, but I was willing. That's all I would say to God, source, universe. I say, I'm willing. I don't know how. I don't know when. Show me just the next step. I'm willing to be more loving. I'm willing to be more compassionate. I'm willing to move this forward, even though I don't know how.
What do you hope readers and those you guide take away from your teachings about living in connection? And are there any moments that you can share in your career that felt especially rewarding or validating from that work?
The first one is, what do I hope my readers will take from my work? What I hope that they will take is that nobody is beyond redemption. Nobody is. And even though that's very difficult in this moment when we see people doing very hurtful things, one of the things I have learned and witnessed and experienced myself is that love has the power to transform. Does that mean that we have to just, accept? No, it doesn't. But we all have the possibility to be redeemed. When I've hurt people, I always wanted to be forgiven and seen as a good person who made a mistake. When I was hurt by others, I often would want them punished and separated and isolated and as far away from me as possible. So I needed to see that, how I was acting. And many of the systems that we've created reflect how I acted when people hurt me. They're based on separation, isolation, punishment. But if we want a different world, we have to be willing to change, and we have to be willing to forgive, and we have to be willing to be more loving and be more curious and be more and be more willing to come together.
Specific moments that are particularly rewarding or have been especially validating in your work sharing these things?
Yeah, there's been many. I will say I'm grateful for that. I have been very, very blessed. The one that is sticking out right now in my head is, so one of the things I do with my students, so I teach ethics and I teach research. One of the things I do with my students is I ask them what they feel strongly about. So let's say it's, pro-life, pro-choice, whether it be, whatever they feel strongly about. And then I train them all year on how to emotionally regulate themselves. So I teach them mindfulness practice and compassion-based practice. And then I ask them to write an essay listening to the opposing perspective. Now, they can't be trolls. They have to be credible sources, but they have to be willing to listen to an opposing perspective and then say it back to me. And then the latter part of the assignment is about them, how they felt about it. How did it feel to listen to an opposing perspective without debating, without doing that? And I do it in a very safe way, which means that it has to be like a peer-reviewed research, right, that they're reading rather than having an interview with someone or a conversation. And so this is preparing them to be able to hear and engage in dialogue with people that perceive things differently. And so I can't tell you the number of times the students have said to me that exercise in particular was transformative for them. Not in that they changed their mind. The majority of my students never changed their mind, but I got them to understand that they weren't as far apart as they thought, that there were some similarities or some things. And even though it made them uncomfortable, that they could actually understand why the opposing view perceived things the way that they did. And to me, that is so, so powerful because as you guys mentioned, people aren't having conversations. It's about canceling people, shutting things down. But all that's doing is creating further and further division and isolation. Our kids are more isolated than before. People feel more lonely. Why? Because we're not willing to engage in dialogues together. And nobody needs to change their mind. They just have to be able to hold their difficult feelings and have compassion for them so that then they're able to hold the difficult feelings and the difficult perspectives of other people. And so that's something I'm really, really proud of. And I love continue doing it with my students and hearing from them how transformative that is in terms of getting them to understand that people have a reason for the way that they behave and what they believe. And if we just are willing to understand them, we don't have to love them. We don't have to change them. We just have to be willing to understand them. That in itself is transformative.
That's really an amazing thing to do. I'm really impressed by that project. That is really nice. Speaking of projects, what projects are you working on now that excite you the most?
Oh, wow. So I have a couple of things that I'm doing. The first one I will say is I'm writing a book called Reimagining Education with my daughter. And so the purpose of that is, in the face of AI, there's going to be like more focus on the, content extraction and summarization and all of that stuff. What can we teach students, like the little ones, from the little ones all the way to university, that would actually help us to create flourishing individuals? And I was really, really thinking about this as I see my students sometimes really struggle with the gray. Some of my students really struggle with the opposing perspectives. They want everything there's got to be a right answer. And what is the answer? And what's my grade so that I can just get that grade? And I'm like, you're really taking away from the opportunity of you learning. And so I was really thinking about, even when we're talking about diversity, young kids are not taught about diversity. And I'll explain why. Yes, they're taught that diverse people happen and that there's diversity in the world. And yes, that's beautiful. But the minute that in the school system, they're being taught that there's one right way to do things and there's one right perspective, and that sitting in the classroom for a number of hours is the right way to do schooling, you're automatically excluding anyone who thinks differently, who doesn't think that the assignment should be done in that way, or has struggles with sitting down for a long time. And in fact, sitting down for long periods of time isn't natural for children. And so they're taught that there is a right and a wrong. That's how they get their A's in high school and in elementary school. And so the minute that you do that, you are limiting people in terms of their ability to be able to deal with difference. And so my daughter and I are in the middle of writing this book of how can we help people flourish and be more loving and compassionate towards themselves and others. How would the school system have to change? And has it really changed that much from the time that I did it? Because it was a long time ago. And at the time when my daughter is 18 now, she just graduated high school. So it's still fresh in her mind. And so we're co-writing this book. So that's one thing that I'm doing. The other thing that I'm doing that I'm super passionate about is I'm working on a documentary. And this documentary is not just from people that I've interviewed on my podcast, but people that I've actually met on this journey. Some of the most loving and compassionate people. It's mind-blowing. And people that actually forgave their son's killers and actually helped them succeed. Stories like that. I'm working with a research team as well as a production company and many of these individuals to bring these stories together to examine whether there's cultural differences or whether there's, like differences on beliefs, because there's stories, and I have these stories from throughout the world about people who are choosing to do the unthinkable, which is what Martin Luther King Jr. said, can we love our enemies? Does love have the power to transform? Is that really true? And so we're doing this documentary to go on this exploration to see, is it really true? And what have been the outcomes of individuals that chose to do extraordinary forgiveness, to see the people that hurt them not as enemies, but as someone worth caring about? And did that lead to a transformation to themselves and the other person? So that's the other thing that I'm super, super excited about. And, we're in the process right now of securing funding. So yeah, that's what I'm super excited about.
That sounds like an amazing documentary, and I wish you the greatest of luck with that. We'll have to follow up with that. But finally, how do you envision the future of relational well-being and mindful communities in a rapidly changing?
Oh wow, another great question. I envision that there is going to be, there's going to be more community building. And I see it now. In the midst of all this division, there are groups of people coming together in unity. During COVID, I was made aware of a project where a community, a neighborhood came together, actually share bills to actually make sure that nobody would lose their house during COVID. And so they piled their money, they shared resources, and they actually opened up for donations from people. And it became like this major, it was on national news because of their willingness to not see anyone as a stranger, their willingness to come together and say, you know what, your well-being is connected to my well-being. I can't be well unless you're well. And so I see these pockets of community, of people coming together, understanding that We are not disconnected from one another, and we're not disconnected from the land, as Indigenous people have mentioned many, many times. We're not separate from Earth. We're not separate from our world. We're not separate from one another. And how can we come in mutual collaboration and unity? And so, when you look at our world currently, we don't really live in community anymore. Like the nuclear family that tends to be like what is considered the family, but in older times we lived in community. Our elderly didn't go to nursing homes. They were taken care of by the community because caregiving is difficult. It's the same with the children. So the elderly, the aunties would help take care of the babies. The young people would do the work, and so I envisioned that kind of community coming together in mutual aid and love. And so I'm seeing that in pockets, and that's what I'm really like desiring to do, is create this community where we come together and we live together, not necessarily all in the same house, but just like living in communities rather than being so isolated in the way that we are.
Giselle, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Your work, whether in your books or at the Maitri Center, is a testament to the power of self discovery and meaningful connection. And I'm truly grateful for your voice.
Yes, thank you for dropping by and sharing your insights with us, Giselle. We truly appreciate your time. It was great hearing your perspective on all these important things. Having dialogues like these is crucial to ensuring the world understands and learns what compassion, empathy, and awareness can do for every one of us.
Absolutely. And until next time, that has been Around the Table with the AOTR.